when one looks on the life and work of Senator Morris, every time I sit here and we hear the comments on it, someone who would have experienced the challenge, I always fear for myself the possibility of losing my sight. But he never wavered, and he stuck to the task, and he has achieved a lot. And I think he's an inspiration to Jamaicans that you face challenges, you face a lot of headwinds during your life, that you can overcome with ambition and your desire to work and achieve. And we must commend Senator Professor Floyd Morris on his re-election to this significant post. I also wish...
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with your leave, if I might add my own words of commendation on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and to indicate that it was a proud moment for us to secure his re-election. He was a candidate that performed more than creditably in his first sitting, and that, of course, did help the campaign very much. But the first effort, because these things are very technical, I have to say, was to secure the CARICOM endorsement, which I did in Antigua at our COFCOR meeting in sufficient time prior to the start of the last press in the campaign. It was a very competitive field. There were 15 states competing for 9 seats on this committee. Senator Morris, when he was elected in his first term, was the first Caribbean member of that committee. And to have him return is not only a reflection on Senator Morris, but also a positive reflection on our country and brand Jamaica. So we were very happy to support him. The team worked extremely hard. And I think maybe people don't understand enough. I wish one day we could share how it is that these candidatures are supported. So when I am on a Saturday morning signing 95 letters that have to go specifically to foreign ministers to confirm exactly how it is that we're seeking to position the last consideration before we enter the week when the vote will be taken. When it is that the technical people have to be ensuring that they get to where they are so that in capital and mission, both are aligned on how the vote will be given. And the general support, the reception, the lunch reception hosted at the permanent mission, etc. Again, it was a team effort that helped to ensure that Jamaica was once more shining, and the Jamaican candidate in Professor Senator Floyd Morris was successful in his return. So we're very proud of the re-election, Mr. President, and we wish he were here present with us, but I'm sure we will have another opportunity when he is to repeat our commendations. So thank you very much, and allow me to publicly state my commendations to the team at the Permanent Mission of the UN in New York and here, and to thank each and every one of the 135 countries that supported us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Minister. Senator Scott Motley.
I, like Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith and yourself, would have preferred that Professor Floyd Morris would have been here. We are also very extremely proud of him. And my only question after congratulating him is what next? Because good things happen in threes. And to be appointed professor 1 week and then to have this remarkable achievement the next week, I don't know how we can top it. But bearing in mind his personality, his nature, his determination, it is quite possible. I know that it was a campaign which the Ministry of Foreign Affairs contributed to significantly. The things that happen behind the scenes are not usually known by the public. But I know that Senator Morris is deeply appreciative of the work that was done. And he never fails to inspire me. I am just in awe of how we approach his challenges. And I try to emulate him in so many things, especially in his constant refrain that he has placed in my head, nothing about us without us. Because I use it not just for persons who have disabilities, but just to engage people generally to understand that the first and most significant thing is that we make them feel that we are a part of anything that we are doing as policymakers. He is my close friend. He is almost like family, and I'm extremely proud of his achievements. And I thank you for raising it today, President.
Thank you, Senator Scott Motley. And I heard you loud and clear when you said good things happens in threes. All right, and before we also move into the agenda, bring to the Senate's attention that a former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mrs. Violet Neelson, and she
Mr. President.
Sorry. Oh, Senator Morris, my apologies, sir. I did not see you online, but I will afford you the opportunity. You haven't heard the commendations of your colleagues to make a comment.
Yes, Mr. President. Thank you very much, Mr. President. And sorry, apparently there's a delay in the connections. But I did hear your commendations. I did hear the Honorable Minister's presentation, and I did hear Senator Scott Motley's presentation as well. And I just want to briefly make my comments and to extend my profound appreciation to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and the Ministry of Labor and Social Security and the government of Jamaica and all the countries that supported my re-election. It is a very important committee in the UN treaty body system with 192 countries signing and ratifying the treaty, making it one of the largest treaty body in the United Nations, and signal the commitment of states across the world to improving the condition of persons with disabilities. And so, you know, I mean, as a first step to being elected as an individual expert on the committee, the government of your country has to nominate you. And so, you know, I am deeply appreciative of the confidence reposed in me by the government of Jamaica. And it was a very interesting campaign, Mr. President. And one of these days, I will share the experience because it's different from what took place in 2020 when I wasn't interacting with the delegates face to face. It was mainly an online campaign then. And it must be noted that in 2020, I received 91 votes. And in 2024, I received 135 votes, an increase of 44, which again signals the confidence that the world has seen in my work. And it's also a signal of the standing that Jamaica has in the United Nations. And again, I thank all those who were particularly involved in the campaign. And I have to mention Ambassadors Angela Comfort from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ambassador Brian Wallace, who is our ambassador to the permanent mission of the United Nations, in terms of the support that they gave. So thanks very much. And, you know, I say to Jamaicans, anything that we want in this life, we can achieve. We have to be disciplined, we have to be dedicated, and we have to make God at the center of our lives. And once God is in it, you will win it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Morris. As I was also moving on to bring to the attention of the Senate the passing of former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Ms. Violet Neelson, who was a member of Parliament in the constituency of East Central St. James. And I will just read a tribute from the Honorable President, Senator Thomas Tavares Finson. Today we recognize the passing and mourn the loss of our trailblazing icon, Ms. Violet Neelson, whose contributions to Jamaican politics and public service will forever be cherished. As the first female Speaker of the House of Representatives and the first female President of the Jamaica Agricultural Society, Violet Neelson broke barriers and set a precedent for future generations of women leaders. Ms. Neelson was a three-term Member of Parliament who represented East Central St. James from 1989 to 2002. Her tenure as a parliamentarian was marked by her unwavering integrity, firm yet fair leadership, and tireless advocacy for parliamentary democracy. Her political career also included serving as Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Development, Planning and Production, the Ministry of Education, and the Ministry of Health. Ms. Neelson will be remembered for her kindness and her gentle spirit and her dedication to our nation. We extend our deepest condolences to her family and friends. May her soul rest in peace and light perpetual shine on her. It's a tribute from the President on the passing of former Member of Parliament, Violet Neelson. It was just an opportunity, if you wish.
I would be very brief, Mr. President. I wasn't privileged to know Ms. Neelson, but I have heard nothing but well said of her. A trailblazer, as you have indicated, first female leader, or rather first female Speaker of the House of Representatives, to lay a path for future female parliamentarians, I think must be a legacy of which to be proud, and certainly to preside over the JAS, which is a traditionally male-dominated environment, sector, and association, certainly must demonstrate that this was a woman of no mean, of no soft metal. She was a woman of great strength. So I regret not having crossed paths with her, but give thanks for the legacy she has left, and ask simply that her soul rest in peace, and that condolences be extended to her family and extended circle of loved ones, and that light perpetual shine on her.
Senator Allen.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is with great honor that I stand here today to pay tribute to Mrs. Violet Neelson, Miss Vi, as some would call her, Mrs. Neelson, and other circles she would be called Comrade Vi. A woman, as you've said through the President's note, of great integrity, significant strength, and hard work and dedication to her country and to her parish, and more importantly, to her Somerton in St. James, from which she hailed. I had the great fortune a few months ago, which feels like just 3 weeks ago, but it was in November of last year that I had the great fortune of, along with the Leader of Opposition and President of the People's National Party, Mr. Mark Golding, to join him in a tour of East Central St. James, her beloved constituency. And there is no visiting Somerton without visiting Mrs. Neelson. And I'm grateful for having had the opportunity at the age then of 92 to sit with her for a short time. And she was still the radiant, beautiful, strong woman who welcomed us onto her veranda. As a woman politician from Western Jamaica and a member of this parliament from Western Jamaica, I walk in her footsteps as other women walk in her footsteps. She has left a trail of firm hands with a way of being in kid gloves. Because with that firmness came that smile. We knew exactly where she stood. There's no question as to her position. And as has been said, being the first female Speaker of the House and first female President of the Jamaica Agricultural Society, she has contributed significantly to this country. There are many who mourn her loss today, including her daughter, Jacqueline Broadbent, other members of her community in Somerton, including her caregivers, and her dear friend, and some would say little brother, the Most Honorable P.J. Patterson, who looked to her as a source of, as a confidant, a dear friend. Jamaican. As we all do. I use this opportunity to give thanks.
Turn up.
Thank you. Yes, as I said, thank you. I use this opportunity to send condolences to her family, her community, her church, the United Church of Somerton, and the People's National Party at this time for the loss of a great woman, a stalwart, a trailblazer, and someone in whom we are all very proud and grateful to have had the chance to work with her. May her soul rest in peace and light perpetual shine upon her.
Thank you, Senator Ali. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Professional Engineers Registration Board for the financial year 2021-2022. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Housing Agency of Jamaica Limited for the year ended March 31st, 2020. Annual report of the National Environment and Planning Agency for the financial year 2014-2015 and its related ministry paper number 25 of 2024. Annual report of the Southern Regional Health Authority for the financial year 2013-2014 and its related ministry paper numbered 26 of 2024. Annual report of the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office for the financial years 2013-2014, 2014-2015, 2015-2016. Annual report of the Anti-Dumping and Subsidiaries Commission for the financial years 2017-2018 and 2018-2019. The monetary policy statement covering 6 months ending March 2024. Quarterly monetary policy reports dated February 24, 2024 and May 2024. Under the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act 2017, the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Measures, Extension of Period of Operation Orders 2024, and their respective resolutions in respect of 1. the Greenwich Town Zone. 2, the Parade Garden Zone. 3, Savannah Lamar Zone. 4, the Augustown Community Zone. 5, the Mount Salem Community Zone. 6, the Denhamtown Community Zone. 7, the Norwood Community Zone. Ministry Papers numbered 27, 23, 2024, entitled The Law Reform, Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Measures, Social Intervention Updates, December 9, 2023 to June 4, 2024, dated June 4, 2024, in respect of 1, the Greenwich Town Zone. 2, the Parade Garden Zones. 3, the Savannah Lamar Zone. 4, the Augustown Community Zone. 5, the Mount Salem Community Zone. 6, the Denhamtown Community Zone. And 7, the Norwood Community Zone, respectively. Also laid on the table of the House by way of information is the report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the National Housing Trust Housing Benefit Special Selection Perth 1A Housing Development Order 2024, and the report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the National Housing Trust Housing Benefit Special Selection Catherine Estate Housing Development Batch 2 Order 2024.
Bills brought from the Honorable House of Representatives, petitions, papers, reports from committees, notes of motions given orally.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that the following orders be referred to the Regulations Committee of the Senate for consideration and report. 1, the National Housing Trust Housing Benefits Silver Sun Housing Development Order 2024 under the National Housing Trust Act, which was laid on the table of the Senate on the 10th day of May 2024. 2, the National Housing Trust Housing Benefits Special Selection Perth 1A Housing Development Order 2024 under the National Housing Trust Act, which was laid on the table of the Senate on the 7th day of June 2024. And 3, the National Housing Trust Housing Benefits Special Selection Catherine Estates Housing Development Batch 2 Order 2024 under the National Housing Trust Act, which was laid on the table of the Senate on the 7th day of June 2024. And Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will ask for the suspension of standing orders to allow me to take the motion, notice of which I have just given.
Question and answers to questions.
Mr. President, may I ask the House Leader to give an update on the question standing in my name, which was originally tabled in December last year. When Parliament was prorogued, it fell off the order paper, and I retabled the identical question. So it's been 6 months we're waiting for these answers. Perhaps the Minister can explain why this inordinate delay.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I had actually hoped to have them. There was clearly a misunderstanding of how to respond to some of the questions, because you had in fact retabled them exactly as tabled before, and there was clearly some uncertainty as to how to deal with the dates. They therefore, I hope, will be clearly stated in time for us to take them at the next sitting, but I am regretful that they are not ready today. Thank you.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to sittings of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of standing orders in order to allow me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to enable the minister to take the motion notes of which she gave earlier. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it, Minister.
Mr. President, I now ask that the motion be approved.
You have heard the question, members. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is intended today to take through its concluding stages the Financial Administration and Audit Amendment Act 2024, and I propose to start that debate without delay, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the bill before us, the Financial Administration and Audit Amendment Act 2024, seeks to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act to establish what will be known as the National Natural Disaster Reserve Fund, the NNDRF, and amongst other matters, identify the sources of funding for this NNDRF and the conditions under which withdrawals may be made. Mr. President, Jamaica faces multidimensional threats, including natural and economic disasters, which have the potential, they have and in fact have the potential to place tremendous financial pressure on the government and people of this country. Through the establishment of the NNDRF, the government is moving to buttress and strengthen Jamaica's disaster risk management framework and to continue to develop even more prudent expenditure on disaster resilience and recovery. Mr. President, unquestionably, Jamaica is one of the most beautiful countries in the world. And our Blue Mountains are known for their cool majesty and their coffee. And our shores are known for their white or black sands, depending on which side of the country you find yourself on, and our delightfully warm waters. So beautiful is our country, and in fact these features, that we forget sometimes that they are associated with vulnerabilities. So that mountains are formed by tectonic activity, which makes us vulnerable to earthquakes. And warm seas are part of the ingredient for storm activity, which makes us vulnerable to hurricanes. We have faced catastrophic events in the past, and apart from the more historic earthquakes, senators wouldn't need very much prompting to recall Wild Gilbert, although some would have been younger than others and at different stages of life in terms of their experience.
Minister, I would appreciate if you would leave me out of that.
I will leave you out of this, Mr. President, I will. But just last evening, we were at an event at the Chamber of Commerce celebrating 245 years and celebrating regional trade, etc. And one of the things spoken about was, in fact, Wild Gilbert, the Hurricane Gilbert. And the DJ pulled for Wild Gilbert while Senator Hill was on the stage. And I want to tell you that the whole room was having a moment, because it really was such, it is lodged in our memories for so many different reasons. But certainly not least of which was the fact that it claimed 45 lives. It left survivors without electricity. And I say without fear of contradiction that my road was, if not the last, one of the very last roads to get back light. So it could well have been, but I want to tell you, we were at the end of that process of restoring electricity. Running water, similarly, recall very much going to this aunt or that uncle to bathe after school in the evening because there was no running water at home, and you had to pack your thing to have the water for morning. And Gilbert is lodged in our memory. Telephone service, we won't bother to speak about that because that was even later. And of course, 80% of homes across the island lost roofs. 80%. Damage was estimated at approximately 30% of GDP. Lives were impacted across, you know, the experience of Jamaicans was extreme across the piece. Between 1990 and 2020, Jamaica experienced damage valued at a total of $705 billion from natural hazards, including 16 major hurricanes and several flood events. And of course, Hurricane Ivan in 2004, we recall, it erased 9% of GDP. In slightly different circumstances, and this is no-name storm, you know, in October 2020, senators might recall that just after extremely heavy rainfall, Prime Minister Holness had reported that in addition to the roads maintained by the NWA, 60% of parochial roads were affected by rainfall, and that damage was estimated at close to $2 billion. The fact is that Jamaica is located in the second most climate vulnerable region in the world, second most climate vulnerable region. And it doesn't take a named storm to cause significant damage. And I always, when we're in international fora, speaking about these issues, remind people who live in countries where, you know, a hurricane is something you literally only see on cable TV, that it doesn't take an event that makes it to the news to cause the kind of damage that, you know, destroys farmlands, destroys bridges, you know, cuts off communities, and destroys roads significantly, road networks across countries. So that our experience is very, very different in this region than what is experienced elsewhere. And the costs that I mentioned earlier are clearly, quote unquote, historic costs. I mean, these costs will trend higher due to the effects of climate change, which has been and will continue to be this planet's most striking feature in recent and future generations. Hurricane, storm, flood, drought, they're all becoming more extreme, and we add to the mix rising sea levels because of our island state. And we see it, we live it here, we know these things are not academic for us. Rain falls heavier than it used to, we know that. More rain falls at a time than it used to. The volumes are just simply higher, and you even see it in countries that have never experienced this type of rainfall before. In Western Europe, in New York, places flooded out. They've never experienced this before. Climate has changed. So we have to respond. We have to work on making our infrastructure more resilient, but also on making our economy more resilient so that we're able to respond to these and other challenges, because they will come. In addition to the direct impact on people, on individual lives, the social upheaval, damage, and losses associated with these events destroy Jamaica's productive capacity and seriously damage our GDP, balance of payments, trade, and fiscal position. So we have to respond. Generally, historically, our response has been to divert funding from one budgeted activity to disaster response. And this cannot continue. If we are focused on achieving our Agenda 2030 and indeed the SDGs, that type of financial management must be something of the past. It is imprudent. More strategic management is necessary to meet current and future anticipated approaches to disaster. So in doing so, the government continues to implement effective disaster risk preparedness and management and resilience strategies, including fiscal buffers. So, Mr. President, I take the opportunity to share that at the 4th International Conference on SIDS, I was pleased to be able to share some of what the government is doing here. Minister Clark and the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service has been ensuring that climate finance is effectively integrated into the national budget and public financial management systems. I added to that shared experiences in which Minister Samood and the Climate Change Division within the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation has also been critical to the process, working with other government agencies, private sector partners, and civil society organizations to ensure a cohesive and integrated approach to climate adaptation. Stretching even wider, we were able to share also that Minister Mackenzie and the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development has also been critical to the process of anchoring Jamaica's disaster preparedness and emergency management efforts. And under Minister Mackenzie, Jamaica, in fact, became the very first country in the entire world to have all of its local government entities, all our municipalities, committed to strengthening disaster resilience through Making Cities Resilient, 2030 initiative of the UN's Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, something of which, for which we are quite well celebrated as well. At CIDS-4, I also shared information about the Blue-Green facility, which the Development Bank of Jamaica is working on. The DBJ is now accredited to the Green Climate Fund and is also collaborating with the IMF through its Resilience and Sustainability Facility. So on the international stage, and Senator Fraser-Binns can speak to it, she was at CIDS-4 as well and would have experienced the incredibly high regard in which Jamaicans and Jamaica are held. Our experts, our scientists, our government representatives were shining across panels, across interventions, because of the important work that's being here that sends a message that even if you are small and vulnerable, there are things that you can do to increase and improve your resilience, even as we advocate for more access to equitable and affordable financing in order to support our path to resilience. So, Mr. President, looking back specifically at the bill, notwithstanding the NNDRF's reference to natural disasters in the name of the fund, the government is also very much concerned about non-natural disasters as well. Members will recall that during the pandemic, we experienced an economic contraction of almost 10%. In 2020, our economy had contracted by 10%. And we therefore have to think more widely about what comprises a disaster. What is a disaster for Jamaica? And the bill strengthens our ability to do so and makes it more predictable and the response more transparent. It expressly provides that funds in the NNDRF, for example, can treat with disasters that severely affect the economy and that lead to economic loss of 1.5% or more of GDP. So it sets clear parameters which activate our ability to access the facility. Mr. President, it is important to note that the NNDRF is not intended to replace or to displace the role of the National Disaster Fund, which is established under the Disaster Risk Management Act to support mitigation and preparedness, to support rapid and early response to and recovery from disasters. The NNDRF is another layer, and it in fact promotes a risk-layered approach to managing disaster relief. And it seeks to build a stronger fiscal buffer as we move to greater incorporation of disaster risk analysis in public sector investments and planning. So it's in this context, Mr. President, and recognizing the disruptive impact of disasters, that the provisions establishing the NNDRF are linked to Section 48C2 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act, which allows for the suspension of the fiscal rules under certain circumstances. Furthermore, disaster is defined in the bill as any occurrence set out in 48C2 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act, which includes public disasters, circumstances of severe economic crisis, and periods of public emergency, among others. And these are the circumstances which can trigger suspension of the fiscal rules, and the measures that we're seeking to implement under this bill are important, therefore, for creating this fiscal buffer for the country. So if we go specifically to the bill, Mr. President, Clause 1, of course, is a short title, and it addresses preliminary matters such as the name of the act, the FAA Amendment Act, and that it should be read and construed as one with the Financial Administration and Audit Act. Clause 2 of the bill amends Section 13 of the FAA Act by inserting 13A. And in 1A of 13A, it establishes that the NNDRF is created and that it will be funded with resources from the Consolidated Fund Principal Bank Account. And that in the financial years 2023 to 4, a total of $200 million will be issued to the NNDRF in the aggregate, then $1 billion during the following financial year, 2024-2025, and then annually thereafter, no less than 400 million per year, with a maximum of 10 billion inclusive of all resources. And this is what the analysis demonstrates needs ultimately to be present at this layer for fiscal resilience to disasters. Mr. President, Clause 2, that is, we're still in 13A, and this time in sub 1B to D, this addresses the other resources of funds that are available, Mr. President. This would include amounts received from the triggering of the national disaster instruments held by or on behalf of the government. Senators would recall that we are party to the CCRIF, the Caribbean Catastrophe Insurance Fund. We also have the catastrophe bond, which we have issued with the World Bank. We have now in the second iteration of that. We also have the RSF from the IMF, and there are other sources of funding that are externally provided. Clause 2.2, it also includes, of course, unspent balances at the end of the financial year, which can be included, and grants from any source. Mr. President, Clause 2.2 states that the objectives of the NNDRF include providing a disaster risk management facility that enables an immediate financial response to disaster affecting Jamaica. And 2.3 addresses how disbursement should take place. In one circumstance, the Auditor General must certify first that a loss of at least 1.5 of Jamaica's GDP is estimated due to the impact of the disaster, or in another circumstance where disbursements have been made under a national disaster instrument held by or on behalf of the government. So this would mean that certainly if the CCRIF is triggered or the CAT bond is triggered, you would have experienced a disaster because those criteria would have been met, and therefore there wouldn't be a need to do another assessment to look at the quantified impact on GDP. So two broad circumstances. And then Clause 2.4, Mr. President, fosters transparency in the management of the fund by providing that where a disbursement is sought to be made, the Minister shall, as soon as practicable, lay before the Lower House a statement of the sums disbursed, and the sums so disbursed shall be included under the appropriate head in the next appropriation bill or supplemental appropriation bill, as the case may be. And just confirming again that 2.5 defines disasters as meaning the occurrences listed in 48C2, as I referred to earlier, including public disasters, circumstances of severe economic crisis, and periods of public emergency, among others. Mr. President, clauses 3 and 4 amend 24H of the FAA Act by renumbering certain paragraphs and adding a few words to ensure that 24H is subject to the newly inserted section. And Mr. President, the MOR, of course, summarizes the objects which I have alluded to earlier. So, Mr. President, this bill seeks to establish this fund, the National Natural Disaster Reserve Fund, as a complement to the various initiatives, projects, programs, and lines of effort already underway to build disaster preparedness and management, as well as the closely related matter of climate resilience and, of course, financing for these critical areas. So even as we continue to advocate internationally for more concessional financing and grant financing to developing countries and to SIDS, including CARICOM, we continue to promote responsible and resilient investment and infrastructure and construction of resilient infrastructure by the private sector and the public sector at large. We continue to do what it is that we can within our power, given the need for this additional layer of protection. It demonstrates our commitment to resilience, Mr. President, and the fund will definitely, therefore, form another part of the architecture that will lead to a more resilient and prosperous Jamaica. I welcome the contribution of senators on both sides, and thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Bunting.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Mr. President, this bill, which essentially establishes the Disaster Recovery Fund, is not one that we would object to in principle. Essentially, it's a sort of self-insurance fund. The analogy in the corporate world is these captive insurance companies you hear about, where corporate entities pay premiums into a captive insurance, into their captive insurance, until they've reached a stage where they no longer need to buy policies from third-party insurance providers. And in a sense, the concept of this is that if the balances reach a sufficient level, we may no longer need to go to the cat bonds or other third-party insurance schemes, as we would be able to self-insure. And that's a good thing. And we know how often, apart from the mandated sums to be put into the recovery fund, we know how often ministries, for one reason or the other, don't spend their allocations within the fiscal year. Not that it's a good thing. They should have the administrative and project management competence to do that. But at least those funds would be now put in the recovery fund to improve our capacity for self-insurance. So, in principle, we don't have any objection to that. But clause in the bill, in particular the one that refers to on page 3 of the bill, 3A, where it speaks to the National Natural Disaster Reserve Fund, may be disbursed in relation to disaster referred to in subsection 2 upon the occurrence of either of the following. And A speaks to the fiscal commission certifies that the estimated fiscal impact of disaster is equal to or greater than 1.5% of gross domestic product. Should that be the fiscal commissioner? Okay, because the commission that is referred to in the act that established the Office of the Fiscal Commissioner, the commission there refers to a commission of the Speaker, the President, the leader of government business and opposition business in both houses, and the minister responsible for the public service, as is often done in terms of that commission that deals with the remuneration and terms of service and so on of the incumbent. But outside of that, and I don't think that could be the commission that is being referred to here. So I would just ask the minister to clarify. And if you can clarify, I know it would help. So I am correct. Thank you. I know the minister would want to concede even as small a point as that. That's not in her nature. But now that we've clarified that it is indeed the fiscal commissioner who we'll rely on, then I have to raise a serious concern. And that concern is that we had the fiscal commissioner appointed on the 1st of May 2023. Apart from the initial responsibilities which he was given in the Act, we're now adding additional responsibilities. Just last week, I believe, when this bill was debated in the House, the opposition spokesman on finance asked the minister to give a sort of status update on the office of the fiscal commissioner. And he said while a commissioner was appointed, that the office wasn't yet built out. And I'm concerned that we keep giving more responsibilities to an office that is not built out. But even with, that was the Minister of Finances. Yes, the office, the commissioner, the fiscal commissioner had been appointed and was in place. But the staffing, etc., to get a fully functional office had not yet been arranged or completed. But even more concerning, Mr. President, is the fact that information that has recently come to me suggests that despite being appointed on the 1st of May, up to the end of the year in 2023, the fiscal commissioner had not received any compensation, any salary or compensation. And had not received. And I am not even certain if up to today any compensation has been received. But again, this is a case where the person appointed as fiscal commissioner was previously a permanent secretary. Left that position to take up this one, and I understand was then offered a package that was less than the permanent secretary's package. There was some attempts at negotiation, and finally, I guess we had an unusual situation where a fiscal commissioner was being himself put in an impecunious position. Impecunious. One where he would have been becoming short of money, having not received any compensation, any salary from May 1 to December. Well, I think he's still in some sort of limbo, because the Speaker of the House, who chairs the commission within the act that deals with compensation, etc., has once again referred a matter to the Attorney General about when he should start getting pay. Well, the Attorney General has rendered his advice. But as we all know, the Speaker doesn't feel obliged to take any advice that she doesn't agree with, even if it comes from the Attorney General. So we are left in a position where we're putting more and more responsibility on a fiscal commissioner whose office isn't established and whose own compensation and situation is in limbo. Is in limbo. Perhaps individually is in fiscal difficulty. I imagine anybody who went more than half a year without pay would be in fiscal difficulty. So I am concerned that this bill, in effect, even when passed, that this recovery fund and all the other responsibilities that are being put on the fiscal commissioner, both by this bill and other financial acts, that they will not be effective because of the delays in establishing the office and in settling the own personal position of the fiscal commissioner, who was appointed with great fanfare now over a year ago, and we still don't have that position settled and the office settled. This is not an example of good governance, Mr. President. This is not how, we expect our governments to conduct business on behalf of the people. And especially, this is not a tangential office. This is not an office without great importance to our adherence to the Financial Administration and Audit Act. That said act that this bill is now amending. So I would really ask the Minister in her closing on the bill to speak specifically to this matter, because I think the public would have assumed, given the announcements well over a year ago of an appointment of a fiscal commissioner, that we would be much further along in operationalizing, effectively operationalizing the Office of the Fiscal Commissioner, and that we don't, and to assure us that this is not another example of the Speaker exercising autonomy from proper legal advice, and even without consultation with the commission established in the Act to address these matters. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bunting. Thank you, Senator Bunting. Senator Golden Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a short intervention, and of course, I want to really commend the government of Jamaica and Minister Clark as the Minister of Finance on this kind of approach to the management of our economy in disaster time. We're no longer looking at scrambling when there is a disaster, hurricane, or any other weather event. We are preparing, and as a good mom and manager, I think, of my home, this is the kind of thing all we wives and mothers in Jamaica know. You put aside a little something for that rainy day when it comes along, and I think all Jamaican people can relate to that. So I am really pleased as a citizen and as a legislator to see this kind of initiative being undertaken. So I generally support this bill, and I commend it to my colleagues. I have one question in relation to the amendment at section 13A, 1C. If I don't know if we'll be able to get the answer today, but I just ask that it be considered and treated with at some point. In the scheme of this fund, disbursements when made from the fund are as soon as practicable under 13A4. Disbursements are dealt with by a statement being laid in the House as soon as practicable after the disbursement is made, after monies have been drawn down. In 13A1C, at the end of the year, when there are unspent balances in any appropriations, the minister is empowered here to direct that any unspent balances can be directed to the fund. And I just wondered if in doing that at the end of the year, and I don't find it objectionable as we build the fund and the security of the fund, but I just wondered if there was some provision for the minister to advise the Parliament, whether through tabling in the House, of the occasions on which he directed such funds and the amounts that he would so direct. May it please you, Mr. President. Those are my interventions. I do support this bill.
Thank you very much, Senator Golden Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, you did not recognize.
Yes, I did. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr.
Go ahead,
President.
Senator Fraser-Baines.
Mr. President, I want to start where Senator Golden Campbell ended, because that is a question I have as well. But I want to go a little further, Minister, and ask you whether you could say how much, well, two questions. One, whether for the fiscal year ending there were any unspent monies that could be shared. And secondly, that we would love for
the Parliament to be advised at the end of the financial year as to the ministries and the amount of monies that have not been spent year on year. So I want to start with that. Mr. President, as our leader on this side said, we do not have any opposition to this bill, and we understand the context within which the government is doing this. In fact, I had a conversation, and I mentioned it to my colleagues earlier, that I have been speaking to persons in the insurance industry, and they have indicated that insurance generally has increased, and the increase has been substantial. Certainly for me, it has been substantial. And the reason given is because Jamaica, being a small island developing state, and being so vulnerable to climate change, coupled with the projections in terms of hurricanes, that insurance or reinsurance have to ensure that the principle is as such that if an event occurs, that they are able to honor the commitment. And so with that understanding, we have no objection in terms of the bill that is before us. But Minister, I want to say something as we debate this bill, because it is my view that there are things we can control and there are things we can't control. And the discussion of this bill ought rightly to take place within the context of a discussion on how we treat with the environment. It has to do with planning and not just execution, because this bill deals with what happens in an event. And to the extent that we can, we should do things to lessen the effects of these events. There are some things like earthquakes that you really can't plan for, you know, in spite of, I mean, I remember the earthquake, we had one last October, and up to this day, my own children still talk about it because of the trauma. And so I understand that there are things that we can't, but there are certainly things that we can control. And Minister, when one looks, for example, at the publication done by the PIOJ, the Planning Institute of Jamaica, and it looks at some of our natural disasters over a number of years, and then it went on to talk about the percentage to our economy. So we have, for example, Hurricane Michelle, and Hurricane Michelle actually had 8%. It cost the economy 8%. Hurricane Ivan was 8%. We have Dennis and Emily, which was 1.2%. And then we have Tropical Storm, not a hurricane, Tropical Storm Nicole, which was 1.9%. So we have seen over the years that whether it is a hurricane or a tropical storm, natural disasters continue and increasingly affect our economy. But what struck me in this report was not only the effect on the economy or in terms of the GDP, but the PIOJ went further to talk about some of the contributing factors to our loss and damage. And it spoke about the age of our infrastructure. It spoke about the design standards, the location, the state of repairs, and the environmental conditions. And Mr. President, I just want to speak briefly on these, because we do have buildings that are aged. And, you know, my grandfather worked at PWD, and my mother always spoke about the fact that he's one of those construction workers who really built with stone, and so the buildings built then are much stronger. The challenge we have is that there's no maintenance that is taking place. And as we contemplate our preparedness for natural disasters, I think it is going to be important that we start to maintain what we have. And when we talk about maintaining, I'm not just talking about our buildings, but I'm talking about our infrastructure. I'm talking about our road infrastructure, our telecommunications infrastructure, our electricity infrastructure. Because the same PIOJ report and our water system, it speaks to the fact that there has not, most of the damage that took place was damage to our infrastructure. And so, Minister, through you, Mr. President,
I would love for the conversation, certainly not at this bill, but I'd love for there to be an ongoing conversation in terms of how do we prepare for these natural disasters. We don't just wait until January, which is Earthquake Awareness Month, or we don't wait until June 1st, which is the beginning of the hurricane season, to start a conversation on public education and what to do and how to protect your documents. But there has to be a targeted, focused, ongoing conversation and engagement, including expenditure. I'm not saying the money is not being spent now, but there has to be very targeted and focused to ensure that we prepare so that if and when these natural disasters come, the damage is less. The other thing as well is our design standards. Now, some time ago, 2018, I believe, we passed the Building Act. And I remember speaking in this space where I said this is a fantastic piece of legislation, and I still maintain it is a fantastic piece of legislation because it speaks to things such as climate change and the green environment and green spaces, especially in multifamily buildings. But what we have found is that the Building Act by itself simply cannot work. And so, if we are to be serious about building standards or design standards, we have to ensure that we have the Building Act, but we also have the complementary piece of legislation, the regulations, as well as the engagement and involvement of all our stakeholders for it to work. We have to ensure that our local parish councils do what they're supposed to do, so they monitor without fear, they monitor without favor, and when actions are to be taken, they are taken. We have to ensure that the NEPA and the NRCA, that they do what they're supposed to do because they are a very important part of our design standards. And of course, we also have to encourage, and I must commend those who have been doing it because we do have some of our designers and architects who have been designing environmentally friendly buildings. We have to encourage them to do that. We have to incentivize them if needs, because that is where the country has to move. And that is how we ensure that when these natural disasters come, that we are so prepared that though we cannot prevent loss and damage, because of our preparation, that loss and damage is lessened. And so I'm recommending we do that. And our environmental conditions. Minister Samuda stepped out, but he and we have been talking a lot about just the environment and how do we as a country protect our environment. And when I'm talking about environment, no, we're talking about the natural environment. Because the truth is, we cannot escape the reality of what we all experience called climate change. We can't escape the effects, the reality of rising sea levels, of warmer temperature. And as has been predicted, we're going to be having more intense and frequent hurricanes. In fact, this hurricane season is predicted to be one of the most active in history. And so, therefore, we have to ensure that we take the best care we can of the environment, bearing in mind that as a small island developing state, there are things that we have no control over. As a small island developing state, we contribute very, very minuscule to environment destruction, certainly at the global level. But the effect is far-reaching or far more, it's far more disadvantageous to us as a small island developing state. But there are things that we can do. So just last week I was told that last year we had over 80% of coral bleaching. Now that is something that is very significant and it is projected. In fact, there are some persons who argue that it is in the 90s and it is projected that it is going to be worse as times become hotter, as the temperature rises. What is it that we can do? How do we protect our coral reefs? What is the effect on our coastal communities? And I am not saying the government has not been doing any work. I'm saying that the conversation about fiscal management and investing for the event of a natural disaster, part and parcel of that discussion has to be how do we prepare ourselves to ensure that the effect is not as disastrous as it can be? And part of that preparation is how do we protect the environment? How do we invest in the environment to ensure that we play our part in lessening and reducing that effect? So, Minister, with those few points, I want to make one recommendation. There was a fund called the Road Maintenance Fund that was established some time ago, and it served its purpose. It was good, and I really think there may be weaknesses. But perhaps as we talk about maintenance, that came to mind because I think that is something that we can revisit. It doesn't have to be called a road maintenance fund, but when we look at the quality of our roads, when we look, for example, in areas where there's massive development, I cannot tell you how many times I'm driving in certain communities and the cement is on the road. I can't tell you the big potholes which are within very close proximity to the area that is being developed where we're having these multifamily homes. Perhaps as we consider preparing for natural disasters, that we need to also, through engagement with stakeholders, see how we can get them to play an active part in maintaining our infrastructure. We have to ensure that there is serious planning going across. I mean, first of all, the developer digs up the road to do what he needs to do. Then he covers it. Then the NWC comes and digs up, and then it covers it. And then the JPS comes and digs up, and then they cover it. It makes very little sense. So again, that communication, that working across sector, that working with stakeholders is something that we can use. We can use more, and it will help us financially, but also when we get all the stakeholders, public and private, to come on board, then it will help with the maintenance of our infrastructure, which I spoke about earlier. So, Mr. President, I do not have any reservations about this bill. I believe that it complements some of the other measures that have been taken. You know, Minister spoke about the catastrophe bond. We spoke about the insurance facilities that exist with the Caribbean risk management. And so this supports it. But I believe that we ought not to look solely at the end, but we should start at the beginning and make it a continuum by considering some of these things that I have mentioned before. If it pleases you, sir.
Thank you very much. Just before, Madam Minister, just before any other speaker, I just wish to place something on the record. I'd spoken to Senator Bunting before he left, asking him to just remain, but he had an emergency, he had to leave, so maybe... Okay. I just wish to point out something to the members of the Senate. Senator Bunting had said that the Speaker had written to the Attorney General asking for an opinion concerning a matter. I can say the matter related to the question of remuneration. She wrote to the Attorney General on the 22nd of January 2024. It was followed up by another letter on April 30th, and a response with an opinion from the Attorney General was provided on the 6th of June. A meeting of the Commission of Parliament, the Fiscal Commission of Parliament, is scheduled for Monday, that's this Monday, the 17th of June at 4 p.m. Senator Bunting suggested that there was an attempt or a reluctance on the part of the Speaker to share the opinion of the Attorney General. That opinion was in fact circulated to all members of the Commission, including the Leader of Government Business in the Senate and the Leader of Opposition in the Senate, to the Leader of Opposition Business in the Lower House and the Leader of Government Business in the Lower House, and to all the other members of the Fiscal Commission of Parliament, including the Minister of Finance. So it is incorrect to say that the opinion of the Attorney General was being shielded or was not being put out. Yes, it was said. It was intimated. I came to that conclusion, and that's why I made the inquiries. So, so I'd indicated to Senator Bunting that I would ask him just to convey to us the information. Thank you very much. Madam Minister? Oh, Senator Sinclair. You haven't had enough. Thank you, Senator Sinclair.
President. So, President, I rise, as my colleagues have written before, to indicate your support for the bill. You know, we got tabled in the past few weeks a few bills, customs bill, and one for the amendment of 61 of the Constitution. I would have hoped that would have done that expeditiously, Dana, so that we would see that the King's most excellent majesty. I know, man, because you're not certain where you are. I heard you on a particular program, and you weren't so sure where you were. But I can understand. Damien. Well, Mr. President, this bill is coming at a very interesting time. In fact, my sisters shared with me yesterday on WhatsApp a publication from the Gleaner, and it's dated June 13, 1979 or thereabout. About 70, I think my recollection is that it would be 77. And it spoke to the June 12 floods in Western Jamaica. And it was interesting that it came up at that time and we got this particular bill. Because I reflected on it. In fact, at that time I was what we describe as schoolers. Yes. And I was on my way home with my mother and my other siblings. And we got on what was previously called the Bogue Road. Now, we got caught in the floodwaters, actually. And we had to abandon the car. And it was a good thing. I mean, once the car stalled in the water, my mother said, "Let us get out." And we all got out. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here. The car went over into the cane fields. But the next day, as a schoolers, for us it was joy because there was no school. And we took the trek with colleagues to go and see what was the damage. And what we saw just in Montego Bay, Long Hill, was split in 3 places. 3 places, and I mean the chasms were so wide. The Great River Bridge. I won't admit. You know, there's a good relationship between myself and Senator Allen, you know. It was 3. I said 3. 3 places. Yes. But Great River Bridge fell into the Great River. So when you looked on Montego Bay at the time, to get from the north coast to the south coast was almost difficult, impossible. And to get along the coast from Montego Bay into Hanover and to go to the popular Negril location, you couldn't, because there was no Great River Bridge. At the time, yes, probably. But at the time, we had 41 deaths recorded. And that was just a storm which impacted Western Jamaica. At the time, I thought it was only Montego Bay that was affected. But then, when the news came out, and you know, we didn't have WhatsApp at the time, or cell phones, and so forth, Hanover, Westmoreland, St. Elizabeth, St. James were impacted. Newmarket was covered. So I'm certain that that in itself would cause persons to recall what the situation was. It was catastrophic damage right across Western Jamaica. As they say, Mr. President, nobody couldn't cross it. And then we had Gilbert. And Gilbert was an interesting one when you look on the track of Gilbert, entered Jamaica, the eye, at Moran Point, and exited at Negril, right across the length and breadth of Jamaica. You know, Mr. President, my research into this indicates to me that just between 1993, a 10-year period, we were informed 26 natural disasters, which came up to with damages of 2.22 billion United States currency. So where we are located geographically as a country, we can experience the hurricanes, the tropical storms, and we are in an earthquake zone. And we knock on wood every time to see that. And I didn't want to say this, you know. We talk about COVID, and it was 100 years from the previous epidemic. I'm not going to say it. I won't say anymore. I won't say anymore. But we get the point. And what it is saying to us, I bring back those to say that I raise those incidents and the possibilities so that when we look at what this administration, the Honorable Minister Nigel Clark, and the administration of the Most Honorable Andrew Holness in crafting, Mr. President, the National Disaster Risk Financing Policy in 2018, it is something that must be commended. Mr. President, what we are dealing with today is one of those decisions, one of those policy decisions that came out of that particular policy. And we as a proud independent state, as our leader said, we must move away from the days where recovery from disaster was dependent on the benevolence of donor countries. And we're going to always express our deepest appreciation for those countries that came to our aid during those difficult times. Because what I saw in the flood rains, June 12 flood rains, we saw a U.S. warship came into the port of Montego Bay, and it was the soldiers. I saw them carrying a lot of steel work, and I said, so we must commend them. When we had Hurricane Gilbert, I remember meeting with the Most Honorable Edward Philip George Seaga when I accompanied my father to meet him at the Sangster International Airport, where he came down and he gave a report as to what he saw across Jamaica. And he said, everywhere he went, there was devastation. I think St. James did not fare as badly as other places in Jamaica. St. Thomas was almost written off of the map. So we know what can occur by these types of natural situations. So I'm happy that we are moving in this particular direction. And we must always do what we can to improve on our resilience. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, the implementation of the National Disaster Risk Financing Policy and the establishment of this fund also confirms the proper management of the economy by this administration. That's what he's saying. When you look on the provisions, where it is saying that out of the consolidated fund, 200 million during the financial year 2023 to 24, $1 billion during the financial year 2024 to 2025, and $400 million annually thereafter. It is saying to us that this administration is managing the economy in a very good way. And Mr. President, what is being proposed here to create this insurance fund and to set aside these amounts for the rainy day is being done at a time when other things are being done out of our own resources as a government. Mr. President, the saving is being done whilst we are building the Southern Coastal Highway. It is being done while we are constructing the Montego Bay Perimeter Road. It is being done while we are restoring the Cornwall Regional Hospital to ensure that the people of Western Jamaica will have a first-class facility once it is completed. We are building new police stations, Mr. President. We're purchasing new garbage trucks, providing social housing and other social benefits, paying better wages to police, nurses, doctors, teachers, and others in the civil service. And we say, whilst we're doing that out of our own resources, we are going to be setting aside in a special fund to ensure that we can do for ourselves without stretching our hands to donors to assist us in the time of natural disaster. The economy, and yes, and we're doing it without asking Damien for an increase in taxes. Yes. In fact, I wonder, some of them over there need protection for them own side, because they just hung you out to dry. I thought you were going to cross the floor at that time. Mr. President, I raised a question, and I will raise it as I debate this particular issue, so that anybody who is reading this bill and may come across the same question, the minister, in her response, will provide the answer. And so it is not just kept for myself. But there's a cap on the fund. And we heard the comments in relation to, there's a cap on the fund. We heard the comments in relation to insurance going up and so forth, the cost of things increasing. And I just wondered to myself whether, in relation to the potential and the possibilities of amending and increasing the cap, well, based on how I see it written here, we'd have to come back for the passage of another bit of legislation for that purpose, as against using the more flexible approach of ministerial order with affirmative resolution and so forth. But I'm certain that there is good reason that exists for that. Mr. President, I heard the comments of Senator Fraser Binns in relation to us building out and ensuring that we are resilient right around. I point her to what has been done by Minister Christopher Tufton in the Ministry of Health. And it just came out in April of this year, where they have obtained from direct relief $3 million to support the installation of a large solar energy system for the National Health Fund's pharmaceutical distribution facility. And what I gather from that is that they are ensuring that they are resilient, that if there is power outages or any other things that may be caused by natural disaster, that they will still be able to respond to ensure that there is a flow of medical aid to the nation's health system. So when you look on this administration and how it is approaching things, we have health fund, we have the view of building out resilience in the health sector. We have heard about it in respect to the tourism sector. Mr. President, this administration is covering all bases in all sectors as we go. I agree with Senator Sophia Fraser-Binns when we say that this particular bill deals with one spectrum of disaster. What happens after? That's what this is about. And I do agree that we should look on the other side and ensure that we put in measures that can save lives, save property, reduce the possibility of tremendous loss, whether to infrastructure or otherwise. You know, we had a storm in western Jamaica the other day. And I feared going to a district that is called White House. White House in Montego Bay is right up on the sea. Well, I know that you know it well. And when I got there, I was happy that I didn't see what I thought I would have seen. Based on how the waves came in the vicinity of Margarita Vale, Old Hospital Park, I was fearful to go to White House. I said it was not as bad as I expected it would have been. But some of the residents there agreed with me, and they told us of their experience during the storm. And I said, well, you know, probably what we need to do is to build out tsunami warnings across Jamaica. We have one, I understand, in Old Harbour. We have to ensure that that one is maintained. Pardon me? Well, it is tested. They have probably to ensure that if it requires certain mechanics, that it is up and running. But to build it out, we are in an earthquake zone. The thing does not have to happen here. It can happen miles away, and then we can be impacted by tsunami. How do we respond? Are we going to have chaos in respect to the movements of people? We have to plan for those things. We have spoken about, and we have been speaking about it for years now, decades, in relation to mandatory evacuation of persons. There were some flooding issues that took place out in the former constituency of Senator Crawford, and persons, they ask the question, why are persons allowed to build in these areas that they put themselves at risk, and they create risk for others in respect to what they are doing? Mandatory evacuation is something that we need to look at. I am in local government, happy that we are, as a unit, we are the agency that has responsibility for planning, and we do have our regular meetings in the St. James Municipal Corporation involving all stakeholders, from civil society and from state agencies. And in fact, I believe that we are in St. James, where's Senator Williams? Not in here, but we in St. James, and under our current mayor, Richard Vernon, where I must commend for partnering with Bluebird Philanthropies, United Cities Local Governments, and the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation at Johns Hopkins University. And we just launched in St. James the Youth Climate Action Fund. This program, Mr. President and members, is a program which will offer grant funding to youths between the ages of 15 to 24 who are interested in designing, producing, and overseeing climate change activities. An expected outcome of this particular program is to ignite awareness and action in communities on the issues surrounding climate change and what individuals within their communities can do to protect their environment and to ward off the negative impact of climate change. And I encourage, we are the only municipal corporation in all of Jamaica that sought participation and applied for getting grant funding for projects to be done by our youth and to raise awareness amongst our youth and within communities. And the grants can be up to $5,000 US for a particular project. So I think that that is a significant way in which municipal corporations can get involved and to ensure that we make our resident citizens aware as to what is happening. Mr. President, the issue of building codes and compliance was raised, I agree. Local planning authorities, municipal corporations, and NEPA must be vigilant in what they have to do and do it without fear. Public and private infrastructure must be done efficiently and in the best locations, guided by expert objective review and to meet the building codes that have been put in place under the new Building Act. And I just want to say to Senator Fraser-Binns that the municipal corporations, the building officers, the planning officers attached to the municipal corporations across Jamaica have been doing training since the beginning of this year. I think they have completed it now. But they had to go to UTEC and do training to ensure that they were competent and up to date in respect to the new Building Act and respect to the new building codes. And I think this will go a far way to ensure that we are prepared. And so when persons make their application for buildings and planning approvals and so forth, these considerations, the building codes will be taken in place. We can be prepared to reduce the effects of any natural disaster that comes upon us. She spoke about the environment. This administration, and I'm certain when my senator colleague Matthew Samuda returns and speaks, he can go in a little more detail. But Mr. President, this administration, in respect to protection of the environment, and we persons, whether it is true or not, we speak about the Blue Mountain as being our greatest protector against hurricanes. Every hurricane coming here, they eventually just dodge us at the last minute. And we say it is the Blue Mountain. But we have put in place, we protected the Goat Island. We need these buffers against potential storms. The other administration was planning to remove Goat Island from providing that type of protection. This administration knows about protecting the environment and how it can work to save us as a country from disasters. Cockpit country situation that has been spoken about, and I'm certain Minister Samuda will speak more about that. But we don't ask the how, as I heard coming from across the floor. We take the action that has to be done to ensure that we put ourselves in a good position to save us from natural disasters. And as Minister Leader said, our local government, Mr. President, under Desmond Mackenzie, the Honorable Minister, all municipal corporations across Jamaica have joined the Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative. And that was reported also in the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. We are the first country in the world to have all municipal corporations attached to this initiative, and it shows that we are thinking of the possibilities, we are ensuring that we are prepared. And this particular aspect, the building out of the policy that I spoke about, shows that this administration is doing what is right for Jamaicans. Mr. President, I close by saying again that I support the approach, the multi-layered approach, coming out of the same policy, and for the passage of this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Senator Sinclair. Go on, Senator.
Make sure you read this here. Yes. Mr. President?
I'll recognize you when you press your button there.
Is it pitch presser?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, Senator Crawford. I was looking at the other one. Senator Crawford, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, let me offer my support to the concept that I'm seeing promoted of the summer skills program under the Heart Trust NTA. And I'm happy that the minister is present, but it is an ingenious idea that would encourage and expose many young persons to the different skills and vocational areas for them to eventually choose among them. Most times when we say vocation and skills, it's reserved to what we see directly in front of us, construction and electrical. And there are so many other aspects. I mean, I want to see more Jamaican chefs through culinary exposure, not just Jamaican cooks, but chefs through culinary exposure. Interior decoration is also one of those areas that is expanding and becoming more important, and also available with online sources. You can be decorating foreign. There's a yes, overseas, not just local houses. There's a website called Decorilla that uses distance decoration. You take a photograph of your space, and somebody in Timbuktu is designing. But this exposure of our students of whatever age to skills, it combines well with another thing that the Minister of Education has been speaking to, which was the exposing primary school children to vocation jobs. And many of us think that it means training them in it. That's not. What is the salary for this job? What's the possible earnings? What are the skills what are the talents that you can apply? So those two, yes, no, you see, this is coming on the news for the young men and women out there. So I am encouraged by that. Okay. All right? Yes. The president never intervened.
No, you know, I wouldn't intervene while you are complimenting my minister. I was waiting for you to say that you had written the policy some years ago, but
no, I'm coming out.
Yes, Senator
this
Crawford, the bill.
I, however, have some questions and indeed some concerns. The first is that it seems to be duplicating the catastrophe bond. And it seems to be duplicating the catastrophe bond which we have bought for the next 4 years. And the catastrophe bond says that if there is an impact from a catastrophe, that we can claim up to $150,000 US dollars. This actual activity, I believe, would not apply to what many of us are assuming it would apply to. Because the trigger, as is found in section 3A, clause 3A, says 1.5% of gross domestic product. That's about $34 or $33 billion. The last heavy rain that we had, the damage to our infrastructure was estimated at $409 million. So therefore, a catastrophe of impact to these levels would not be what many of us are thinking, heavy rain and flood and those activities. It is a catastrophe so great that it would have contributed to $1.5 billion. 1.5% of our GDP, which is 30-something billion dollars, about 33, 34 billion, depending on what the US is today. It then goes to say, B, disbursement have been made under other national disaster instruments. So therefore, it is triggered if the catastrophe bond comes in place, or if the insurance, whatever other instrument will be, it is also triggered by that, which is also dependent on these levels of damages. So therefore, a lot of what we are assuming to be, or we're saving for these regular outcomes, this is not a regular outcome. So therefore, it suggests to me then that this is a long-term situation. This is why it suggests to me it's a long-term situation. If it is triggered by 35 billion and 34 billion, then the savings over time, because if something happened, God forbid, this year, it is an immaterial quantity that will exist in this space of only 400 million when it's triggered by 23 billion. 35 billion, I'm sorry. The catastrophe bond is about 23 billion, 150,000 US. If it triggers next year or the year after, it's 2.3 billion. 2.3 billion is less than 1% of GDP. So therefore, the benefit of this proposal is more midterm to long term. And so I wonder if this funds that is being sequestered could not contribute to some more immediate priorities, some for nature and climate change. And we all accept the realities of climate change. East Rural St. Andrew was spoken about. When I was a member of parliament for East Rural, we would reserve $7 million in CDF for just the probability of climate activity. If there is we only had 15, and we kept 7 in a day. When there's a storm in East Rural St. Andrew, in the hills of Mavis Bank, there's landslide. Down in Kentire, in the middle, there's flooding. And then there's storm surges in Harborview. This is one constituency. So therefore, it's not a misunderstanding of the needs and the possibility and the risk. But a saying, if we spend the 400 million on drains and gullies in the immediate, in these 4 years that were covered by the catastrophe bond, up to 23 billion, that if we committed in these 4 years to immediate corrections such as drain and gullies, such as effective waterways, such as certain infrastructure, bridges and those things, but also spaces that have been inadequate if an hurricane should come, such as what do you call them again, when the people relocate to those spaces, the shelters, which are often schools without adequate bathrooms for the use as a shelter. I also wondered if there aren't other activities that in these 4 years, that 2.3 to 4 billion could not be used. And I said 2.3 to 4 billion because it states that it would have 400 now and $1 billion for the next 2 years, but also if funds are not spent from the budget, it will go to it. I do not presume that the Minister of Finance is estimating or expecting inefficient usage of funds that is very well needed. So therefore, I'm not putting too much from that in this. We shouldn't be budgeting for unspent funds to a very large extent. So to that extent, if we have 4 billion over the next 4 years, I think that there are other activities that can also be considered, such as the fact that we still have 32 schools on shift system. And that might be a more immediate correction that is needed, because at best, this is triggered when we're getting all the other insurance that we need. So to this point, I'm saying that while it is that protection and risk mitigation and insurance is a necessity, a good thing, I'm not sure that the duplication of what exists as is, and the trigger point that this particular one have satisfies the immediate need while we have the catastrophe bond. The second component I wonder about is the $10 billion maximum. Again, this can be an immediate thing. It's a we won't benefit truly until middle term, long term. Based on the time value of money, 10 billion might be a low limit, because in 10 years, 15 years, 10 billion can't really do much. If we go 1.5% of GDP, hopefully in that 15 years, that would move to 50 billion or 55 billion. And so 10 billion is kind of a today's limit. But I put it to you that I would propose a trigger more than a limit. Meaning, when it reached to this number, it triggers the ability to spend on A, B, C, which might not be out of a catastrophe, but things that can mitigate the impacts of catastrophe. So if you are going to have an insurance, because the negative might be 5% of GDP, the negative might be 10% of GDP, because we cannot now predict what category these hurricanes are coming, or how many can come. We could get 3, God forbid, back to back. So I'm saying that if it is that there is, okay, it triggers the use after 15 billion, that the excess can be used for X if necessary. So we will discuss and implement those things. So therefore, I believe that the limit of 10 billion might be too low based on the timeline that this will have any serious impact going forward. So those are the concerns that we have. We believe that at this time, with the catastrophe bond protection of up to 150 million US dollars, that it might be better usage of the current funds within the next 4 years on the more immediate realities that are being faced by the society and the more immediate requirements of the environmental degradation, the drains and the gullies, which we all know are in need of immediate maintenance, cleaning, construction, etc. There are many roads, as well as Senator Samuda would know, that don't have adequate drainage, V drains and U drains, and lead to destruction of these roads when heavy rain comes in. So it is my opinion that in the 4 years that we have the cover of the catastrophe bond, that those funds should be used for immediate construction of mitigation infrastructure and other priorities. We can move, therefore, after, if we choose not to continue the catastrophe bond, into other activities.
And this would be a policy of the People's National Party?
It's not authorized at this time for me.
But we are continuing.
Thank you very much, Senator Crawford. Gone? No, 1 minute, please. No doubt you are well aware of the. No doubt you are well aware, Senator Allen, of the oft-used phrase that one day Busher are still Busher. So you have authority to speak from a seat other than your own. I hope you find something to say. Senator Samuda.
Thank you, President. Also asking for permission to speak from a seat not usually mine.
Absolutely.
Thank you, President. I want to make 2 brief points in support of the legislation before us. The issue was raised by colleague and friend Sophia Fraser-Binns, Senator Fraser-Binns rather, about proration. And this is important, but it's also equally important for those listening and those who will no doubt research the debate on this bill at a later date through the Hansard, that the country and those who will research it are aware that we are doing significant preparatory work to lessen the impact of disasters. I'd like to point to, firstly, 2 programs that this government has launched over the last 2 years as my first point. The first is, when you think of disasters, sometimes because of Jamaica and our lived experience, the first thing that comes to mind is your Category 5 hurricane or your major earthquake. But one of the things that we launched 2 years ago, Mr. President, was a bushfire warning index. It is a new IT-based system, cloud-based system, that takes several data points from the Met Service, from the Airports Authority and their monitoring systems, and from the WRA. Now that has allowed us to accurately predict wildfires with a very high rate of accuracy, up to 90% in some cases, and that has been transmitted, that information is transmitted to the fire brigade, and that reduces not the risk of these fires, because it tells you where the risk is, but reduces the response time where you're likely to have wildfires, and reduces the impact and reduces the acreage that is burned. So that's one thing that we've done which helps us to prepare for a particular type of natural disaster. The second point is something I'd like to bring all colleagues' attention to. I did make a statement on it 2 years ago, is something that we affectionately call JSRAT. It is the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment Tool. Now, what this did, Madam Leader, was take thousands of data points related to Jamaica's infrastructure, public and private, drop it into a mainframe supercomputer, and analyze the climate risk, taking decades of Met Service data, decades of WRA data, to see which roads are at greatest risk, which water systems are at risk, which hospitals have which particular risk, which schools, where JPS has risk, which factories have particular risks. And we've put that into a system, and we're now able to assign climate risk scores to infrastructure. So even as we continue to develop the PIAD process, as we are in the post-IMF bailout era, and you're trying to build out and modernize your project development phases, we are looking at our infrastructure, Mr. President, through the climate lens and assigning risk. So there's great preparatory work taking place to assign, or rather to order capital investments in a way that most deals with your resilience issues. So that system, we have, I suspect when the State of the Nation opens, we'll be at a point of major announcement on a system that will become the back end of the JSRAT, as well as something that will support the UE, the University of the West Indies Climate Studies Group, a joint system that will also start to look at what's called climate attribution studies. Now, climate attribution studies, Mr. President, is the next phase. So after you've done your preparation, which I'll come back to in a second, but just so that colleagues understand what this determines the role that climate change had in disasters. Meaning if you have a Category 1 hurricane, you can't automatically say climate change caused this Category 1 hurricane. You can say you had it out of season because of climate change and the warming ocean. You can say if it was Category 5, it would have been Category 3 if not for the warming ocean. So climate attribution studies will take all the data that you have and will be able to assess the role that climate change has played. Would you have had 2 months of drought or 4 months because of the environmental changes? And this is going to be increasingly important for several of the funds that Jamaica does currently participate with and funds that it will seek to participate with, which I will come back to in a second. The third point, Mr. President, that I think colleagues should recall, and it's very important, when you look at the SPARK program, one of the things that jumped out at me because it seemed so incredible at the time, colleagues, was that Jamaica simply didn't have a register of all of its roads. A municipality might know its roads, RADA knows where farm roads are, most of them. NWA could tell you where their roads were, but you didn't have a single registry of roads. So you weren't able to plan and budget in a particular way for which roads needed to be done when. So eventually coming out of the SPARK program, one of the outputs expected is that citizens will be able to, and you'll notice that's why we've brought citizens in for these consultation exercises. Citizens will be able to say, well, this road is scheduled to be paved in 2027. After that, because of the sort of asphalting and drainage work that will be done there, it should hold for 12 years, so look for it in 2039, and then beyond that, you have those discussions. So you build this registry and this infrastructure plan with a very long run-up, so that the Ministry of Finance always knows or has a fair idea, based, if they look at the inflation rates, what will be required each year to maintain your infrastructure. And this is incredibly important work. The other 2 factors, which I will speak on in much greater detail, so everybody come and prepare to sit down long on that day, that the Climate Change Division and the PIOJ are working on now with support from the GCF and agencies like the CCRI and the CARICOM Climate Change Center, is 2 documents which are very important for long-term planning. One is Jamaica's long-term strategy for climate change, which is analyzing the risk points and is something that all countries agreed to do in line with the Paris Agreement. So this isn't something new to us, or rather unique to us, but it is something that Jamaica is progressing well, and Jamaica expects to complete this long-term strategy early in 2025. That's one. The final point of preparatory work that the Climate Change Division is undertaking with support from external partners is what is called your NAP. It's your National Adaptation Plan. This looks at all sectors of the economy and all sectors of society, assesses their risk, and assigns projects and things that need to be done to make them resilient. So what do we need to do to make sure that with a warming climate, our schools are cool enough for students to learn? What is it we need to do to make agriculture, something that I know Senator Crawford knows well, more climate resilient to the external shocks and the extended dry periods? Which roads do we need to do when? What is the housing standard? So from a preparatory standpoint, I think that the country needs to be aware that those 5 things are indeed in place. And there is a lot of work taking place with significant support from multilaterals and academia to ensure that Jamaica, at least on paper, has the right strategies that then become bankable and fundable. And I'm comfortable with the pace at which those things are indeed being done. Mr. President, the issue of the changing climate is going to be the defining issue of this generation. There is no two ways about that. It is why this fund that is to be set up is a good thing. It is why when the Ministry of Finance, through Minister Clark, was able to get World Bank support to allow us to have a catastrophe bond with the premium sponsored externally, it's a good thing. To be determined. But when you are a member of organizations and programs like CRIF, it's a good thing because you build in the response capacity of the government. But let no one at home who has listened not also understand that the government, through its current arrangements with the IMF, have a resilience building fund and have a line of credit at its disposal to restart the economy in case there is catastrophe. This $900 million fund will build resilience, Senator Crawford. So unlike Senator Crawford, when you had a bailout where you had fiscal reforms, this resilience fund comes with resilience building projects and targets. So you must complete some legislation and some policies that do go into those assessments, whether you've passed the test, so to speak. But you also will be asked to do significant coastal resilience work. So work like what is taking place in Anato Bay now in that coastal revetment work that like what was done on the Raytown segment, work like what was done in the, I can't remember the name of that facility from the World Bank that built the fire stations in places like St. Thomas and in St. James that build the capacity to respond. The public needs to understand that through our capital budgets and through our international financing arrangements, we are building resilience at a far faster rate than ever before. We do need to find a way to upscale that because the risks are so great. But I just wanted, Mr. President, to ensure that the public listening was very clear that the government is taking steps at an unprecedented rate to deal with the issue of climate change and to properly plan to allow for the allocation of these resources. And final point, Mr. President, just in response to these issues, Jamaica, in, I believe it was 2016, Mr. Johnson Smith, when you signed the Paris Agreement on behalf of Jamaica. Jamaica became a loud advocate for the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund. If you look at the national statements at the varying COPs and the varying preparatory meetings, the need for the establishment and operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund, which is specifically to deal with this, was lobbied for very hard when Jamaica was chairing AOSIS, when we chaired CARICOM as an individual state. We've mentioned it in every single forum, and we have been at the table helping with the process which has now culminated in the World Bank's board approving that the fund be housed at the World Bank that was announced, I believe, either yesterday or the day before. So the Loss and Damage Fund now has a home with some indicative startup rules and has commitments, albeit some small commitments for funding, but that has started. So Jamaica, for the next 5 to 10 years, will have to also, again, redouble our efforts to get countries to fund this properly so that nations like Jamaica and our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean can, when they assess what climate change has done, which is also why we're putting in that scientific capacity and working with partners through the University of the West Indies, can indeed draw down on funds that we are entitled to. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Senator Samuda. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to thank, no, it's fine, thank you. I want to thank colleagues on both sides for the rich discussion that we've had today about this important bill. It is a fact to say that the multi-layered approach that Jamaica is taking to creating economic and natural disaster risk resilience is a beacon of light among the work in developing countries to ensure that we are prepared to meet the current and future challenges that climate change brings. It's not an easy thing to do, and it does require balance. So the questions that have been raised today, is the threshold sufficient? Should the funds be placed in contingency, or should they be used for other matters such as building, adaptation and mitigation? Those are the terms we use. These are important questions. They're not poorly made points, but the fact is they have been thought through. And the scheme that is in place now does not have any duplication and does provide appropriately for the different types of risks that we have. So even though there's a broad reference to being able to pull down from your other existing funds, it's not that they all will be triggered in the same circumstances. So there's low frequency type of cyclones, low pressure thresholds that will trigger the cat bond, which is very different from what will trigger the CCRIF. The CCRIF is absolute catastrophe. Antigua and Barbuda flattened, that triggers CCRIF. No house left standing, no tree left standing. That is the type of catastrophe that defines CCRIF. Very different from the cat bond, which has a different set of parameters. And similarly, as we use tools such as have been described by Senator Samuda, and which, again, we also were very proud to feature at the SIDS4 conference recently in Antigua and Barbuda, the JSTRAT. And I want to talk to you about the title. But there's the tool which actually, you see, that was the problem. That's what assessment tool. That's what kept coming up. So we said, let's think about it. But the substance of this tool, we could. The vision behind it, and the pragmatic reasoning behind it, and the scientific robustness that is being delivered by the partnership. University of Oxford, University of the West Indies, and so Minister Samuda, I know you will speak more about it on another occasion, but just to say that it was one of the elements of Jamaica's work in this space that I was very proud to share in the SIDS4, and that other countries are waiting with bated breath for the model to be finalized so that they are able to utilize it as well, because the value is clear, both for public and private investment in resilient infrastructure. And as we have our own program rolling out roads under the SPARK program, and even taking schools off the shift system, Senator Crawford, so that those programs are in place. They do exist now. And we will be able to do more in terms of making sure that the infrastructure is resilient with tools like the JSTRAT and others. We are working with the Coalition of Disaster Resilient Infrastructure and under the Initiative for Resilient Islands program as well, which we launched together with India and the UK and Australia. I mean, there's a lot that is being done to make sure that what we're doing now is done differently. And therefore, I wouldn't be unduly concerned. Having raised the question legitimately, I do give you the assurance that the ways in which the different funds have been established and the resources established do provide sufficient robustness around and balance. And on the question of balance, I will segue to the point raised by Senator Sinclair, which was, you know, why would you not create a circumstance that would allow perhaps a ministerial order to increase the threshold? And the thinking is that because there is such a balance required in the allocation of resources across the piece in order to determine what will be kept back in the kitty to ensure that we're able to respond versus what will be spent to fix a road today. That's a very difficult question, and one that's deserving of debate, deserving of parliamentary scrutiny, and really not, it was felt by us in the interest of democracy and transparency that the best approach would be to require the bill to come back so that a full discussion can be had as to whether the new value is appropriate and whether the trade-offs that are necessary in that context are actually agreeable and fully transparent. So the 10 billion is felt reasonable in the circumstances of the different elements of funding that are provided, and I'm also able to share on the other question that 1.2 billion was provided for in the budget that was passed for 24-25. So that is actually now in the fund. The seed funding is there with 1.2 billion. So it is it's there, and by the way, it is not a precondition that other bonds or other instruments be triggered in order to access. It is that if that occurs, then you will have met criteria that would be sufficient. The point being that you either have to certify the 1.5, either have to have that certified, or meet, or would have you would have had other instruments would have been triggered, and therefore you would be in circumstances that would allow. What has been shared with me in terms of information, Senator Crawford, is that over the past 20 years, that 1.5 threshold would have been met no less than 3 times. Could have been met more, but it's absolutely no less than 3 times over the last 20 years. And remember, this is not a sole structure. There's a multi-layered structure that allows different flexibility and different access. So we still have the disaster risk fund under the Disaster Risk Management Act, which allows you to drain cleaning and your early response, etc. And there are other funds in place, contingency fund, etc., those which has been expanded as well. So I want to give you the assurance that the government is thinking in a very intentional way about how we determine this balance and how it is that we ensure that we are prepared to build resilient infrastructure and to prepare for disaster, to respond to disaster, and of course to also ensure that the concept of disaster is sufficiently wide that it will allow us to deal with both natural and economic aspects of same. Mr. President, as I close, and I note, that we did note the typo earlier, Fiscal Commission should be Fiscal Commissioner, and there's a typo just above it in sub 3 where the word or the pronoun is missing just before disaster. So in relation to a disaster referred to in subsection 2, I believe. So that, right. A disaster referred to in subsection 2. The 3 just above, sub 3. Subsection 3. So it's not an amendment, just a typo. Yeah, right. So, but other than that, those are typographical notations, and accordingly, it does seem that the act itself, together as drafted, stands soundly ready for approval by this chamber. So as I draw to a close, Mr. President, I just wanted to refer to the issue raised by Senator Bunting earlier. And I want to thank you for having brought to the fore the information which you did. And maybe just express a little bit of disappointment that information which was shared within the membership of a committee, so confidentially in the circumstances, that information should have been used to try to presumably score some political points today on an issue where really, I know Senator Bunting cannot be saying that the Speaker, in the rightful exercise of her authority, cannot seek opinions. The opinion was shared within a week of it having been received. And it was shared for a meeting scheduled for early next week. For Monday, same thing, the early next week. So the point being that there's no question, and he's aware of the circumstances, so there's no question. There's no question that should be placed in the minds of the public about the actions that were taken. And furthermore, I want to just commend the commissioner who has been appointed and who has been working. There's a confidence that within 6 months the office itself should be established, because work has been being done with consultancies to establish the terms of reference, the job descriptions, and various other elements that will provide the supporting structure for the commission. So the commissioner himself does not comprise the office. He will have to be supported, and that work has been underway. Remember, this is a new institution, an entirely new institution. He's been working with Canadians, etc., on a fiscal research council that's going to support. There's a lot that is being done, so that when it is approximately, should be, and the issue, that particular issue will be shortly resolved as well. So just saying that, you know, clearly the new commissioner is a patriotic Jamaican, a person of sound ability and understanding, and that in the circumstances as well has been ensuring that this body, when it starts its work, will be ready to meet all the obligations which are being placed on it by the legislation that has been passed in this Parliament. So, Mr. President, I want to, with that, note that, actually, I'll leave it there, Mr. President, and ask that we move to second reading of the bill.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. The question is that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favor?
An act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Thank you very much. With the agreement of both leaders, I will put clauses 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm sorry. No, your microphone wasn't on. Yes.
You have my agreement, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put clauses 1, 2, 3, and 4 with the recognition that there are 2 typographical amendments to be done in clause 2, but we don't have to concern ourselves with them. They would have been taken care of. So I put clauses 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those in favor? Against? I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Against? I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Minister?
Mr. President, might I ask for third reading of the bill?
Thank you very much. The question is that the bill be read for a third time. Those in favor? Against?
An act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act read a third time and passed.
Madam Minister, you are moving for the adjournment. And before you do it, may I invite you to say a few words about the Diaspora Conference, which is taking place in Montego Bay. And I would ask Senator Allen to say a few words concerning an endorsement, really, of the conference. Thank you.
Why, thank you, Mr. President. I do not mind if I do. So just to share, Mr. President, that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, together with our partners, our legacy partners, the Victoria Mutual Group, JN Group, and Grace Kennedy Group, and a myriad of sponsors, and our diaspora partners, particularly the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council and the Global Jamaica Diaspora Youth Council, we are all extremely excited that this weekend our 10th Biennial Jamaica Diaspora Conference starts. It starts with a church service at 9:30 a.m. at the Burchell Baptist Church in Montego Bay, St. James. You are more than welcome if you happen to be in town. If you happen to be in town, it would be, all senators have been invited to the service and indeed to our welcome reception, which takes place later in the day at the Montego Bay Convention Center. Of course, there's been wider invitations as well for us to kick off the week. We have a broad program which is rich in content and seeks to balance a focus on not only Jamaica's national development, but our mutual concern about the interests and welfare of our diasporans in their chosen countries of residence. We're seeking to share a lot of information. We've ensured that it is not government heavy, but there are ministers such as Senator Morris Dixon, Minister Floyd Green, and Minister Williams and Minister Hill, for example, who will be sharing in areas in which the diaspora has expressed deep and strong interest. So we have education and training, skills development, digitalization. We have investment roundtables and how-tos, as well as diasporans sharing about their businesses and how they operate businesses successfully in their chosen countries of residence for others to learn, connect, and network with them and to tap into their systems of influence. We're also going to be launching two portals, a diaspora registration portal, which will help the diaspora members themselves connect with each other based on their interests and areas of work. And there will also be a portal that is going to be something that the diaspora has been asking for years, which is essentially a path into understanding what the opportunities for investments are. So we encourage not only philanthropy, which we welcome and value highly, but we encourage wealth creation, saying you have moved away with a view to moving back or to staying, but either way, you have always remained connected to the welfare of Jamaica. But why not have it be mutually beneficial? Why not invest here, creating wealth for your family, while also building Jamaica's economy? And so this is a portal called the JAM-DEM portal, Jamaica Diaspora Engagement Model Portal. And it was developed in conjunction with the International Organization for Migration, and has been formally handed over to the ministry now, and we're going to officially launch it at the Diaspora Conference with members present. We also have some interesting things happening in terms of our Riverside chats. So we have a nice, because they have the fireside chats, we are launching the Riverside chat. This will be the next thing, I have no doubt. So it's going to catch on fast.
But like a river bash?
Not a river bash, sir, no Riverside chat. But we'll have, for example, Riverside chat with a new commissioner, so that you're not only having a panel on security with including the GJDC representative on security, but you'll have technical personnel and you'll have the commissioner himself present. So I know diasporans are looking forward very much to meeting him, to hearing more about what his vision is, and so many more things. We are, of course, I couldn't sit before mentioning the Diaspora Day of Service. So on Thursday, diasporans who are coming with a view to do a project, and we have several happening. Food for the Poor is building a house in a day. I will be a part of that project for a family of 5 that is in destitute circumstances. The concrete and everything lay already, but then we build the actual edifice in the day. Also, there will be groups who are coming to adopt clinics. There's one, for example, at Barrett Town is being adopted by a group from South Florida. I hope to be there as well. There are care packages being done for a particular private primary school. Name is slipping me now. But you know how it is, diasporans have particular connections with communities, etc. But what will happen is throughout the week, you can sign up to join and participate and support any of the 14 projects that we have between St. Elizabeth, St. Anne, and St. James, so that they can be even bigger and better than the organizers conceptualize. So lots of great things happening. There's green entrepreneurship, Minister Samuda. Many things from reef construction to, well, you name it. I hope he'll still be encouraged to pass through. There's a youth innovation challenge, the winners of which will be announced. There's a Jamaica Social Stock Exchange, as well as the Jamaica Stock Exchange. There will be a marketplace, government at your service. So RGD, PICA, TAJ, everybody who would normally, you know, some of the agencies that diasporans most look forward to engaging with when they come home, they'll be there on spot at the Montego Bay Convention Center. And if you are Jamaican who is registered, you can access them for same-day service too. So I know that everyone is excited. Not only all booths sold out, all tabletops sold out. We have expanded the tabletop surface area. Micro businesses, macro businesses, big hotels, small hotels. Everybody is there networking, sharing opportunities for investment, for cooperation, for collaboration and partnership in building Jamaica Land We Love. So I want to encourage everyone who has some time in St. James over the next 4 days, or rather from Sunday to Thursday, to pass by. Register. We've kept the 2019 rates of registration. The website is diasporaconferenceja.eventbrite.com, diasporaconferenceja.eventbrite.com if you're interested, or go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade website where you will find a QR code or link. We have partner hotels as well, so you get good rates at Iberostar or Oceans Coral Bay. I always get that name wrong. Coral Springs, or Oceans Coral Springs. And of course, you know, Mobe has a happening scene with residents, Airbnb and all sorts of things. Call Senator Allen, she may have a suggestion or two. But Mr. President, again, I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to invite Jamaicans listening and invite indeed Senates and the Parliament staff. If you're interested, if you have time, if you are that side of the world, then please come and experience our 10th biennial Jamaica Diaspora Conference. We have people coming from 16 countries. So as far as Ghana and Kuwait and as close as Cayman, as interesting as Chile, I mean, really, every region except Southeast Asia will be represented at this conference. So it is truly going to represent the global nature of our diaspora. So come and experience.
Thank you very much. And I noticed you didn't touch the cultural part of it, but I can imagine that would be very interesting too. Senator Allen?
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, speaking from a seat that's not my own, I appreciate the opportunity that you've created. You know, Minister, you've outlined a very robust almost week of activities for the Diaspora Conference. So much so that I believe Senator Crawford and I just agreed that we're going to figure out which one of those many events we will try to attend. It's certain the Riverside chat the chats sound interesting, and we're not going to shell down anything, but not that kind of party. But you know, it's important in the engagement of the diaspora. It's a crucial reality that all countries are eager to move forward with. And our diaspora has, over the years, played such a critical role in all that we do and our growth and development in various areas. So it is good to see that the care has been put into outlining or developing a program that allows for opportunities to be outlined as to ways in which the diaspora can be engaged and have been engaged, and we look forward to them to continue being engaged in, whether it is health, education, IT, and other areas that are crucial to the development and for us to achieve our 2030 goals. Certainly, there's no doubt that it is important that this is a across the aisle thing, and it has always been. At the end of the day, we, both sides of the aisle, agree and have worked assiduously to get us to this point. So I must commend the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade for continuing the great work in ensuring that this is done. And I encourage, even though it's right around the corner, there are many flights available to Jamaica from parts, especially the East Coast. Even if they have not already decided, and I'm sure there are opportunities to engage virtually too, that even though they're not, if they have not already decided to come, that they look forward, we can encourage them to make the decision to come to Jamaica. And certainly, I'm very excited that it's taking place in Montego Bay. You know I had to say that. At the end of the day, we have the facilities to allow for many persons to come into Jamaica, participate in this very important event, and also enjoy all of what their homeland has to offer, and to remind them of all of what their homeland has to offer, including rivers. So I wish you all the best, you and your team, with the efforts for next week, and I make the commitment that I will stop by. I'm going to actually see about registering and look at the entire schedule to see what is there, because I don't want to just drop by to drop by. I want to actively participate in something. So I look forward to that. So, yeah, there is. Okay, I will check it out. Creative. And I am creative, you know. See you back. See you back. Thank you so much, and all the very best. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Allen. Minister?
Mr. President, you know, I almost feel motivated to give you the rest of information that I didn't share just now. But
tell me something briefly about the cultural part of it, because I know that no doubt the Ministry of Culture and Tourism have gone overboard.
I tell you, every night our legacy partners sponsor a cultural event. And so, for example, on the Monday night, they're sponsoring a special performance of Pitchy Patchy, which, you know, is a comedic show that just runs the gamut, satire of Jamaican society generally, and it's awesome. So that's going to be the Monday night event. And then there are special guest artists that I can't announce yet because I'm not a sponsor, and I really try to respect their needs on these things. And of course, Prime Minister is giving the keynote on Tuesday, and there'll be a special reception in the evening as well, hosted by the JN Group. The creative panel, by the way, for those, because you don't always hear about these things. On the creatives panel, we're going to have Kwame McPherson, the Commonwealth Short Story winner, Dwight Peters from the fashion sector, Andrea Dempster-Chung from Kingston Creative, and Kadeen Ellis, who is just a massive star and influencer from New York, who's going to be part of the panel. And Delia Harris is going to be there moderating on that day. It's going to be a vibe. There's so much to experience and to learn that it's really going to be a wonderful experience. So the program is available on the website that I gave earlier, so that you can look and say, okay, let me register for this day because I can't do all. And you don't know, you may come on a day and then say, you know what, I need to come back tomorrow because there are people I've met, or people I need to come back and see. So I want to thank you, Mr. President,
And
once more.
I just remember too that there is to be a panel on constitutional reform.
There's a panel on constitutional reform. I forgot.
I just received a reminder and asked that you
with
mentioned.
members of the panel and being moderated by US-based attorney Marlon Hill, who is actually a former member of one of the earlier Diaspora advisory boards when it was the smaller 8-member grouping. He was one of the earlier members, so he's a really very experienced in this diaspora movement, although still quite young and energetic. So thank you for reminding me about that, Mr. President. And if you have no other gentle reminders for me, I will move that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed.
Members should have heard the question. Those in favor? Against? This Honorable Senate now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed.